Good morning, good evening, good evening, folks. Not morning, is it? Always get that mixed up, doesn't it? Don't I? It seems like Mondays are just kind of crazy. Sundays and Mondays just boom, 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 boom. I tell you, got so much going. Thankful to be busy in the Lord, but man, I tell you what, sometimes I just really get her going. Anyhow, that said, let's get after this. Got a lot we want to talk about this evening. The coronavirus, we'll talk about that. I've got some other issues with regards to the leadership that we're finding as far as it's being put forth with the Democratic Party, etc. But I guess if this particular post has any theme to it, it would be the question of being complicit in the sin of someone else, being complicit in the sin of a group that you want to be a part of, but that particular group is not making the decisions and the stands that they need to be, and you just stand by and allow it to happen. And we'll talk about that this evening. Hi, Cindy down there, Cindy Patton, listening in Louisiana, still in a lot of pain because of the break. She fell off the porch, and multiple things. And pray for my sister, Cindy. I love her so very, very much. There's my mom listening. I'm so thankful. Pray for my dad, just recovering from ankle surgery. Really excited about that. Gabriel and I are filling the pulpit for him while he's unable to get there, but he's healing well, was up exercising today, needs to gain some strength. Pray for my dad, would you please? Complicit. Being complicit in the sins of others. I guess it's kind of a subtitle would be the sin of silence. Just kind of sitting back and lazily allowing things to happen without confronting it. This is something that's very prevalent in our world today with regards to politics, as you can imagine, and a lot of Christians are being preached at that, you ought to back, that's not your realm, you ought not be concerned about that, which is nonsensical. Clearly, we need to be primarily concerned about going to be with the Lord. I get that, but until He takes us out of here, we got to be responsible with what we got, and if we are given the opportunity to vote, for Pete's sake, get after it and vote. There's my buddy Henry, way out there in Arizona. Thank you for joining with me, Henry. I appreciate it. What time is it out there? It's a kind of odd time for you out there, isn't it? But I appreciate you for joining me, brother. Thank you. But anyhow, being complicit in the sins of others. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. It's happening right before our eyes. Last days, that is. Stuff is swirling around about us. And again, I suggest to you that one of two things is on the horizon. Either the Lord's coming back or this nation is going to have to come under great judgment given the perversion that we see happening and the experiences that are going on, the current events that are taking place in our nation today. And I'm not going to play the prophet here, but let me just throw out what I think is likely to happen in the near future, and therefore I am convinced that we as parents, we as church leaders, that we've got to step up, urgently step up. I think that our president, President Trump, is likely to win in the upcoming election. And Henry says it's 7:09, so they're an hour off from us. Out there in Arizona. But I thank you, all you folks out there in Philippines and other places that are watching. I appreciate you so much for joining. Getting back to the president. I believe that our president is likely to win the upcoming election. But I also believe that when that takes place, that you and I are going to experience what I think is going to be 4 more years. The reason I say that we really can look down the road of 4 years, and again, I don't have any special insight from the Lord except just common sense, it's this. Look at what the Democrats are doing present tense. Understand where they're at present tense. See how far they have been willing to go present tense. How dishonest and all those kind of things present tense. Take that and go 4 more years into the future. And I cannot imagine that our president is going to let up. I think that if he can regain the House and the Senate, I think that the next 2 years after he's elected, I think that 21 and 22 could be crazy good for our nation. I think the economy is going to boom. I think the morality is going to have another boost. We're going to get back to good things. He's going to appoint more conservative judges onto the court, etc. But then you go 2 more years into his second term. Is it possible for him to maintain the House and the Senate? That's where I think things get unlikely because of the hatefulness of the devil and how he's working through the liberals of our nation. And then when he is replaced in 2000, what would that be, 2024? And in that election, I just can't imagine a conservative being elected at that particular point. I pray that I'm wrong. I'd like to be the wrong end of this whole prediction. But if that's the case, you got about 4 years. And because I think that the Democrats are so hateful, you see where they're at present tense. I mean, they hate this guy with a vitriol, just a hatred of it. And you can... We need to be praying for the safety of our president because I'm going to tell you, one of the things I'm concerned about maybe more than anything else is that somebody's going to try to take him out. I can't imagine, I can't believe that it hasn't happened already. There's just such hatred in our nation. But anyhow, back to my point. 4 more years? If that's the case, then you and I, well, of course, you got this year also, so let's just give us 5. 5 more years, things hit the fan. You and I need to be preparing. That's why I'm so urgent about this thing with regard to last days. I do not think that President Trump is a godly man, but I do believe that he is God's man. My dad said that recently. I thought that was pretty profound. Let me say it again. I don't believe that President Trump is a godly man, but I do believe he is God's man. Much like Nebuchadnezzar, I believe that God has his hand on his shoulder, and he is going to be used either to bring us a blessing or to bring us into judgment. And I think it's kind of up to you and I. And anyhow, I think we got 5 more years, and then things could get really, really nasty. And so, why in the world are we not paying more attention to these last time's issues? I don't know. I do think I got a lot of viewers that watch me on Monday night, so evidently you're paying attention. God bless you. Hi, Miss Dixie, down there in Louisiana. Appreciate you. All right, here we go. Real quickly in review, this won't be our main topic, but I thought, until this thing plays out, I'm just going to go ahead and give you the weekly totals. This coronavirus. Had a biology teacher tell me recently that I am pronouncing that right, at least the way she says it. So there you go, coronavirus. All this time I've been kind of intimidated by the way I said it because Siri has some kind of weird accent to it. But then I got to thinking, Siri is programmed to have some kind of weird accent. So why in the world I think she's saying it right? I don't know. But anyway, coronavirus. Horrible stuff, China and their communistic background and all that goes with that, they're keeping under wraps as much as possible. Some scientists have actually, I'm told they're just all of a sudden come up missing, and anyhow, it's a brutal place to live as far as political system is concerned. But anyhow, the coronavirus, according to the statistics that we're able to glean, and again, I'm convinced that the communist country of China is keeping a lot of statistics from us. It can be much worse than it presently is. In fact, I think it probably is much worse. But what we have right now, notice the statistics there. 71,451 have been sickened, I'm told, in the course of this thing. That, you see my source down there in the bottom right-hand corner. You'll notice that in brackets, in the parentheses, I'm going to try to keep you up to date. If we go back 3 weeks ago, it was 17,000 plus that they're saying in the world. It went up then to 40,639. And then this week, now we're up to 71,000. You can see how this thing is just growing exponentially. You can see the second statistic there. 1,776 deaths are being estimated in the world. And again, it's an estimate because you can't, who knows how much truth is coming out of China. But if you pedal backwards 3 weeks, it was about 361 when this thing really got started, 910 the next week. And then you can see we're 14 confirmed cases in the United States. Now, this is where I think things get a little bit hopeful for us. I do appreciate our government. I appreciate the health system that we have in America and all of the safeguards. I would like for us to use our brain and think that this could also apply on the southern border and not just have it open wide to all of the terroristic influences that could just come rushing across our southern border. Let's give our president support to build that wall so that we can protect ourselves. But coming back to this issue, 14 confirmed cases in the U.S., but go back 3 weeks ago it was 11, 2 weeks ago it was 12. Now it's only 14. You see, it's not rising that quickly in America. And one of those reasons, because we're on top of things. We're getting after it. I appreciate that as far as our government is concerned. But, again, application with regards to last days. We've talked about it before. God often uses diseases like this to bring a nation under judgment or the world into judgment. And we know that as far as prophecy is concerned, that's one of the things that's often prophesied in the book of Revelation, etc. And so whatever's happening with regards to last days, whatever your eschatology is, however you're interpreting these things, one thing you can't get past is that God has often used diseases, pestilence, such as this to bring people into a position where maybe they'll eventually look back towards the heavens and remember that I am here. I think that's where we're at. Here's where we're going tonight. You remember that second picture there, the 2 men kissing, Buttigieg, whatever his name is, kissing. I'm told last time I didn't really give you the definition, but I'm told that he considers himself to be the wife. And so the guy he's kissing is his husband, and he's the wife in that rather interesting relationship. And I think the guy, whatever his name is, he is claiming that if Buttigieg gets elected, that he will be the first. What do you call it? We always have the first lady. Will he be the first gentleman? I think he's thinking he'll call himself. Anyhow, can you imagine I just can't. I just cannot imagine. But let's talk about that top left-hand corner there. President Sanders' second State of the Union address. We're out of bread. It was intended to be funny, but I find it not only tragic, I find it to be tragically representative of what easily could be the truth when you understand what took place in Venezuela. I just don't understand how he's getting any traction. Anybody who has common sense and can see in real time what is played out in Venezuela, and then this guy, Bernie Sanders, wants to represent those same kind of values here in America, and how in the world he's getting traction? But he is now the leading candidate for the Democratic Party. Can you believe it? And by the way, I'm convinced the Democrats are really panicking with regards to this because they know what's going to happen. This guy gets elected, and it pushes the Democratic Party so far to the left. I'm not sure they can ever recover. And anyhow, but I don't put that up there to be funny because I don't see it to be funny at all. I think that could be easily the reality if we were to elect this guy. If you elect the two, down there in the middle, which you've got. Not only do we have a real representation of homosexual values to the extent that they've almost become militant in the demands that they have. You put Buttigieg in the White House, that's what it's going to heighten. And we're going to find that preachers such as myself who speak out against such perversion by the directives of God, we're going to find that they're going to come under great persecution. And I think that could hasten the day that God brings great, great judgment upon our nation. Old Bernie Sanders isn't much better. He's for abortion and homosexuality and all those kind of things too. But he brings to the mix this crazy socialistic agenda. And can you even imagine? But anyhow, I guess the question I want to ask you is, how in the world did we get here? What can we do to correct it? You see the little book there down below Buttigieg there, Solving Cultural Chaos. I wrote that, a couple years ago. And I can send that to you for free as an ebook. It's not really an ebook. It would come to you as a PDF, which is kind of like an ebook. But anyhow, it comes to you as an email. And you open it up and you'll be able to kind of scroll down through it and read it. It's not a very long read. But I believe it's one of the more powerful pieces of material I've ever put together. Had a lot of controversy about it because I suggest in this particular book that this whole thing really is rooted all the way back in the Second World War, when many of our good brothers had to and our good sisters, women, had to go off to war, and that war changed the world. It changed America radically. Hi, Gary. Good to see you up there in Indiana. No, forgive me, Kentucky. Louisville, Kentucky is right on the border. You got to be careful up there because, boy, they take that person. Gary, I hope you still love me. Good. Thank you for joining me. But I suggest to you in the book, Solving Cultural Chaos, that if you go back to the Second World War and you see what took place is our men and women were called off to war. Many of the men died. Those who came back were hardened by the war scenario, and some of the women were hardened by the war scenario as well. But many of the women, most of the women, didn't go off to war. They did something else very supportive. They stayed here, and a lot of them went into the factories, and they started helping to build bombs and helping to build airplanes and all of that kind of a thing. God bless them. And that was something that had to happen because the world was at war, and in order for us to survive, to defeat Hitler and all of that. But as it all plays out, eventually the war ends. Men come home from the war, battle struck, struggling with relationships, and they have trouble connecting with their sons and even their daughters, but primarily their sons. Women who have been in the factory realm, had to be, find it easier to just stay there and to start bringing in this secondary supplemental income. And as that plays out in our family, we begin to see trends that take place. And it becomes easier and easier for women to work outside the home, for men to be disconnected from real relationships. And you see that this is just exponentially spiraled out of control in our culture to a point at which now many women in our culture feel that it's legitimate, because it's just what we do in our culture, for them to spend the majority of their waking hours each day away from the home, rather than obeying Titus chapter 2 and verse 5, which says that they ought to be dominated by home life. And men, instead of leading spiritually, they being spiritual warriors, because of what took place, the trends that started in, tough guy images, all of that, the John Wayne, the Dukes, and all. Instead of them relating, spiritually speaking, to their family, they began to believe that they had to be the tough guy, and instead they don't relate. And so we've got spiritual leaders who are struggling, the men who are supposed to be spiritual leaders, they're struggling to relate. We've got women who are now spending the majority of their waking hours away from the home, and our children naturally have to end up somewhere, and so they are being dominated by the public school system. And so as all of this begins to, again, whirl around us, you got the public school system who is filling the gaps for the lack of parental supervision. And so that's why I call it substitute parenting. And now we've got our schools who are often the ones who teach our children not only how to do arithmetic and how to spell and write and all of those kind of things, but they're also the ones that teach them their basic values as far as life is concerned. And when the government gets involved in teaching the basic values, especially morality, you got a problem. And so here we are. Look at these two pictures. How could we possibly have ever gotten there in my lifetime? I'll tell you how. It's because we are a culture in chaos, and the only way to solve it is to get back to what God says. Let me send you that little book. And it's a short read, but I believe that you're going to find, it's not going to be comfortable, but you're going to find in that little short read the uncomfortable truth about what you and I need to do to reclaim sanity within our culture. All right, there we are. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take you to, turn that one off and come to this one. I'd like to take you to some applications with regards to this tragic situation that we are in. You see the picture at the bottom there. I'm not sure who drew that. I wish I did because I'd like to give him credit. But that camel sticking his nose in the tent, you're familiar with the proverb. And the camel, it's cold out here, master. Can I just stick my nose in? Why, sure. How about my hoof? Can I? Sure, and how about my shoulders? And by the time morning comes around, the master is sleeping outside the tent and the camel's on the inside. Well, that's what has happened over the course of time. That's what that little book is about that I was talking about in the previous frame. Over the course of time, because Satan has time, at least he's willing to be patient about it until the Lord comes back. He's willing to use up all the time he can to do anything he can to pervert the system. And so what has taken place, I'm convinced, is that the devil has just worked very slowly, very incrementally. And so here are the steps, at least some of them, that we have been taking. Titus chapter 2 and verse 5, it doesn't apply to modern women today. I'm having even some preachers tell me that. Titus 2 and 5 tells that women should become homemakers, love their husbands, love their children, become dominated by home life. Well, that doesn't apply to the modern woman. And so we begin the process. We start stepping slowly away from the authority of God. What about 1 Corinthians 15:33 that tells us, that evil company is going to corrupt good morals? That doesn't really apply to public schools because, after all, I've got to send my children to public school. Had one of my mentors just this past week tell me, Sonny, some folks just can't homeschool. Well, that may or may not be true, but and by the way, I think that it is untrue, but it's true in the sense that we can't immediately go there. But we could, if we had church leaders with backbones, we could begin the process. So let me just ask you rather bluntly, what is your congregation doing to support Titus chapter 2, verses 3 through 5, that teaches older women to teach younger women how to create a home life? What is your congregation doing? What kind of specific programs? How often does your preacher preach on it? What is your elders doing to support the homemaker? What I'm finding is the majority of elders that I'm aware of are doing just the opposite. They're trying to keep the peace by supporting the women who don't want to be at home. They want to be out doing other things. And so in order to keep the peace, they support those women rather than speaking the truth. And so we undermine Titus chapter 2, verse 5. We undermine 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33, because our kids have to go somewhere. And if the mama's going to be out there working the majority of her waking hours, and the daddy's going to be out there working the majority of his waking hours, what are you going to do with the kids? Let the government raise them. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7, that doesn't strictly apply today. That's the qualifications of elders, which specifically talks about how that he should have a good home life. More and more, I'm finding that this is just being diluted into oblivion. That him being an exemplary leader with regards to his home. We just kind of fudge on those kind of things because, this particular person, he's been with us a long time, or this particular person has influence, or this particular person is popular, or whatever it may be. And how good would it look to have this particular person's name on our bulletin? And so we fudge on 1 Timothy chapter 3. You see how we're taking the small incremental steps, and the camel is slowly sneaking into the tent. Well, you see, when you begin this process, and there's many other parts of it, I get that, but when you begin this process, you deny a woman needing to be a homemaker, that children should be raised in the home, not given over to the state, that the leaders of the church need to be exemplary they need to be above reproach. They need to be blameless with regards to the way that they treat their wife, that they should be a one-woman husband. That's what that passage actually says, that their children should be above reproach, and believers and all of that. We begin to fudge on those, and it leads to Romans chapter 1, verses 24 to 27, that condemns homosexuality. And we say to ourselves, well, that doesn't apply to an advanced culture of loving tolerance. You see how we're just slowly letting the camel in the tent? And it all starts with us fudging on the authority of Scripture. That's where we're at, my friends. That's how we got here. And I would like to share more of that with you in that little book. If you'd send me your email address, I will be happy to send you a copy of that. All right, what else we got here? So there was another thing. Oh yeah, I wanted to go with a passage because, as you know, I believe firmly that if you're going to deal with that which is most important in life, and you don't reference Scripture, there's something bad wrong with your leadership. Well, let me take you to both of these passages this evening. 2 Timothy chapter 4. He tells the young man Timothy, Paul that is, he says, listen, my friend, preach the word. You need to be prepared in season and out of season, all the time, to correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. I'll tell you why. For the time is coming when people will not put up with sound doctrine, sound teaching. Instead, in order to suit their own desires, they're going to gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. Is that not today? Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 11. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Two passages, and two applications maybe that we can make from this. In the first passage, notice that he says that we need to be people in these last days when people will not put up a sound doctrine. They want to make the Bible say what they want the Bible to say. Whenever you find somebody getting all squirrely and trying to explain and twist and make it say you got a problem. And he says those folks need to be corrected. Those folks need to be rebuked. When it comes to church leaders that are in this situation, Paul will say, they need to be rebuked publicly. So that's why I'm not afraid to go on live like this and to say in a national way to church leaders across the nation, how you doing? When's the last time you fasted over your flock? When's the last time that you actually took an issue like Titus chapter 2 verses 3 through 5 and you spoke it to your congregation with great power and conviction rather than fudging on it and circumventing it because it might make somebody mad? We are called to rebuke, we're called to correct, and then when you tie it to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11, seeing the harmony of Scripture, he says that we shouldn't have anything to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather we need to expose them. In the bottom right-hand corner, you see what I'm talking about. Don't be complicit. Just recently, had to speak to somebody about an issue of life that very, very awkward, very uncomfortable for me to have this conversation, but we had to do it. Because in order for me to be without guilt, I had to approach it. You see something wrong, you see a brother, you see a sister that's struggling in an area, you know that it's not good for them, you know it's not good for the church, you know it's not good for their family, and you don't speak up, you're complicit. And so if your congregation is making lousy decisions, you're complicit. If your family is making lousy decisions, you're complicit. If you are making lousy decisions, but blaming other people for your lousy decisions, let me tell you something. No, you're complicit. We are told in this passage to correct, rebuke, and later on in Ephesians 5, we are told to expose them. This is the command of God, to expose rather than to be complicit. Meaning, just because you sit silently, it doesn't mean that you're innocent. There is a sin of silence. And it's when you become complicit because you do not speak up and expose the deeds that are causing problems within your home, within your own life, within the church, within the country. Don't be complicit in the sins of others. Well, YouTube channel, won't leave it up there very long, but we've done this before. Please go there, support that, like it. It helps me out a lot, gets me into the feed better if you will do that. Thepodbean.com. And again, remember, I'm sending out those little flash drives that every month, if you're a contributor, and it costs me about $5 to send those to you. And so if you contribute $5, it doesn't cost me anything. If you want one of those, it's all, I speak, what is it, I speak 7 times a week, but 6 of them are actually live and recorded. And you could have those if you, every month at the end of the month, I send those out to my, let me know. That Podbean is where you can go to see them online. Or you can send me your physical address, and I can send you the flash drive. Or you can go to that e-newsletter that you can send me your email address, and I'll send you an e-newsletter. Lastly, conclusion: keep your eyes on the skies because He is coming, and I can't wait. Got up Sunday morning and watched the sunrise, and man, was it great! But I'll tell you one of the things that's on my heart as I watch the sun as it comes up over the horizon is thinking to myself that one day, the sun, S-O-N, is coming for me. I can't wait. Keep your family close. Keep your homemaker vigilant. Keep watching the conditions, and keep investments in your investments in the heavens, because really and truly, stuff down here, it doesn't last, does it? You think about that. The coronavirus. China is one of the most technologically advanced cultures on the planet, and yet here they are. Man doesn't have a lot of solutions, but God does. Don't anchor yourself to this world. Anchor yourself to that which is eternal. And so, be there. Matthew 16:26.